Hello guys, my name is Micah Watson and I'm a composer and music producer, and I'm teaching you through the Ableton Live manual one chapter at a time, and today we're going to be looking at chapter 26, which is all about MIDI and key remote control. So I will be showing you how to assign your MIDI knobs to new parameters in Ableton Live if they're not already mapped, and I'll also be showing you how to change your preferences, as well as also tell you the different kinds of MIDI controls that exist and how best to use them. So I've got a project over here and I've got an audio file. So I've got a project over here and I've got this audio track, and this audio track has a clip.
I wonder why.
And I've also got a MIDI controller set up in Ableton Live. So if you've attached your MIDI controller, just go to Command Comma, so that's opening up your preferences, and you want to go into the tab called the link/MIDI, and over here you can see your control surfaces. So at the moment I've got this Roland digital piano, and as you can see these other two devices are grayed out as they are not connected right now. If you can't see your device, just push the drop down menu and look for it on this list. If it's not on this list, don't worry, you can still set it up. You'd be setting it up at the bottom here with your MIDI ports, but I'm not going to go into detail here. You can check out this video if you want to know more about it. When you do assign your MIDI ports, just make sure that you've put a remote on. So in this video, I'm also going to be telling you what this takeover mode is, and also when you might want to have remote on and off. So for now, I want to have it on because I want to be able to assign buttons on my MIDI keyboard to parameters in Ableton Live. So all you need to do is drag your mouse to this MIDI button, and push it, and everything goes blue/violet. And to assign a button or fader to a value in Ableton Live, you just need to push on one of these violet parameters. So I've already done this. I'm going to push on this clip here. I've already assigned a value here. You can see it's got 1 C3, and that basically means when I push C3, so that's a pitch on my MIDI keyboard, then it's going to actually trigger this clip. But as an example, I'm also going to push this, and I'm going to push another button. And as I push that button on my keyboard, it now assigned a value to this, and it also added it in the MIDI mapping. So now you can see that when note E4 is pushed, then slot 2 on my audio track 1 will be triggered. To get rid of this, I just push my MIDI button over there again. So now let's just move that down. And I can just trigger that from my keyboard. So you can also do that to devices, and I've actually done that with this reverb over here. I've assigned a value to it. I'm going to push MIDI, and you can actually see that on this bypass button I've assigned my note C#3 on my MIDI keyboard, and so I can be playing. I'm just pushing spacebar.
Wonder why.
And I can do that straight from my piano. Now I just want to tell you, this isn't a fancy MIDI controller. It's a really cool controller. It's a digital piano, which is really awesome, but it's not made really for live performance. But I could actually rig this whole keyboard up to perform like the push, and I'm going to be making a video on that next week, so stay tuned for that. On that topic of having device parameters mapped to your MIDI keyboard, I want to just tell you that if you control click on this title bar over here, you have an option that says lock to control surface. If this is locked, it won't matter in which device I'm busy tweaking parameters on my MIDI keyboard. I know that when I'm playing on my Roland keyboard, that keyboard will only ever change parameters on this device. So that's really useful if you've got a really cool setup with more than one MIDI controller. Now I also want to tell you about Takeover Mode. So I just hit Command Comma again, and here you've got Takeover Mode, and you've got 3 options. You've got None, Pickup, and Value Scaling. I'm just going to tell you the difference between these. So when MIDI controls that send absolute values, so for instance faders, that depending how high or low they are, they send different absolute values to your computer so that they change the volume to that specific value. So if you're using these kinds of MIDI controls and you use the same fader for different parameters, then depending on where in your set you are, maybe once you're in this track and you're changing this volume fader, and now all of a sudden you're jumping to this track, and you want to use the same fader that is actually set to this value over here, and you change it again, then it's going to jump. I hope that makes sense, because you've moved the fader down here, and all of a sudden on this new track the resting value is a lot higher. But if you now were to move your fader, it would quickly jump there, and that would cause like an unwanted jump in your audio. So that's where your takeover modes are useful. That's where you can change these. So if it's set to none, Then as soon as the physical control is moved, its new value is sent immediately to its destination parameter. And that's exactly what I just explained to you, and that's what will result in an abrupt value change. If you change the takeover mode to pickup, then moving the physical control has no effect until it reaches the value of its destination parameter. So what that would mean is if you've got this value down here, and this value was up here, and all of a sudden you're jumping here, then you would first need to move the control on your MIDI device up until it reaches this current resting value, and only then will it change the value of this specific fader. So just on pickup, that's quite nice. You can get smooth changes. The problem is that it can often be difficult to estimate exactly where the pickup will take place, because you know that you need to first move your fader up. But how far up do you have to move it before you start hearing it? So you could maybe overshoot it a little bit, or it might take longer for the fader to change than you'd like. And then you have value scaling. So this option ensures a very smooth value transition, and it compares the physical control's value, so down here, to the destination parameters value. So in my example, that would be this control here. So in value scaling, compares those two values and calculates a smooth convergence of the two as the control is moved. And as soon as this fader's position is actually at the position on the screen here, then this destination value will track the control value at a 1-to-1 ratio. So if you then move it down by 1, it'll also move down by 1 on the screen. So for the beginning, it kind of scales the distance that you push differently, and then as soon as it's back into the right position, then it's back to a 1-to-1 relationship. So I showed you the mapping browser earlier. When you push MIDI over here, you get your MIDI mappings on the left, and you might be wondering what's the difference between this key mapping and this MIDI mapping. Well, key mapping has to do with your keyboard, and I'll be making a video about that as well next week. And essentially they're the same thing in that they show you the various mappings that exist. I don't have any key mappings, but say I were to push that and push a button on my keyboard like H, now you can see in the browser that key H is assigned to slot 1 in my track to MIDI over here. So as I said earlier, I don't have any faders on my MIDI devices, but if I did, I could assign their maximum and minimum values over here, and then Ableton Live would make sure that depending how far you move that particular fader, it would be a smooth transition between your minimum and maximum values. Okay, now, important. If you've tried this and it's not working, go to your preferences again, Command, and make sure that for the device you're working with, remote is on. If it's off, you won't be able to put these remote MIDI mappings on your device. In fact, you might have some mappings on your device, but those will be the kind of instant mappings that Ableton just kind of set to your device. But yeah, you can override them. Things that you can do with a normal piano that plugs into your computer or a small little keyboard. You can map these notes to session view slots, like I did, so that if I push E4 or C3, it'll trigger one of these slots. Now note that it has nothing to do with the clip that's in the slot. It only has to do with the actual slot. So you can do things like that. You can map specific samples to your keyboard so that you can play it chromatically. You can also assign values on your piano for crossfades. So that'll be down here, your A and B. I have a video on crossfading if this is new to you, and I will link it below. You can also assign values on your keyboard to specific absolute values, so that you could say maybe a C would bring your fader down to 12, and maybe a D would bring it up to 11. And so you could actually create your own so-called fader by having discrete values across your piano. Here I just want to tell you the difference between absolute MIDI controllers and relative MIDI controllers. Remember when I was talking about this takeover mode? Basically I was describing the difference between an absolute value controller, so that was your first case when there's no takeover and you've got, say, a value that looks like this on your MIDI controller, and all of a sudden you're jumping to a track where the values are higher. Then if you were to change the value on your controller, it would just jump. That would be an absolute value MIDI controller, where it really looks at the number of value. Relative MIDI controllers, similar to this takeover mode at value scaling, would work out the difference between what your value was and where the value is going to be in the future, and kind of scales it smoothly so that if you move the fader up a little bit, it'll move this track up a little bit, and vice versa. And those two different types of MIDI controllers or MIDI controls are better suited for various things. So the absolute value MIDI controls are better for switches, radio buttons, continuous controls, for instance, like you always want your C4 on your piano to play that specific pitch. And your relative MIDI controllers are nice for continuous controls like volumes or pans and anything with slidey values. Of course, there are exceptions and you can find a workflow that works for you, but those are just my general recommendations. You can also use relative mappings to move through your scenes when you're playing a live set. If you want me to make a separate video on this kind of thing, please let me know and I'd be happy to help. I hope that you're feeling encouraged to try and configure your MIDI keyboard in a way that works for you and not just necessarily in a way that it has been, because that's how it was when you plugged in. And if you have any trouble setting up your MIDI keyboard, do check out this other video or let me know in the comments. Maybe I can help you. Maybe someone else here can help you. And I'll be back soon with a video on key mapping as well as a few other cool videos that I have planned. So thanks so much for watching and I will see you soon.